Formed by glaciers leaving behind cliffs, rocky shores, and over 1,000 connecting lakes and streams, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness is a unique place for recreation, scientific research, and education. Along with Canada's adjacent Quetico Park, the Boundary Waters is the only canoe wilderness area in the world and is the most visited wilderness in the U.S., spanning over 1 million acres within the Superior National Forest in northeastern Minnesota. In the early 1900s, the local economy was almost exclusively dependent on the logging and mining industry. Environmental degradation of forests threatened the peace of the Boundary Waters, leading to the first conservation movements. In the 1970s, through a series of hearings and public debates, the issues regarding the use and management of the wilderness were fiercely debated. In the end, diplomacy prevailed with the passage of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act of 1978. Following the act, continued diplomacy has been essential to resolve local tensions and maintain the pristine quality of this wilderness for generations to come. In the 1800s, American settlers began arriving in Minnesota in great numbers following the discovery of rich iron ore deposits and a seemingly unlimited resource of pine trees. As a result, leading up to 1900, the destruction of forests and watersheds reached an all-time high. Conservationists argued for the scientific management of trees to provide sustainable profits. However, powerful lumber barons had no incentive to change their methods, repeatedly lobbying against Congress to prevent conservation bills in the early 1900s. Due to efforts by the Commissioner of the Land Office of Minnesota, Christopher Andrews, the first forest reserves were established in Minnesota, and in 1909, President Theodore Roosevelt set aside 1 million acres in reserve with the creation of the Superior National Forest. Despite these diplomatic successes by conservationists, by 1925, almost all of the land that was not protected had been cut, prompting many of the major logging companies to pack up their operations and move west. In the same year, hearings were held by the International Joint Commission over a proposal to build dams throughout the Boundary Waters. After many days of debate, no decision was reached, but the publicity had promoted the conservationist platform to mainstream attention. Following the hearing, conservationist Ernest Oberholzer organized the Quetico Superior Council, the first of many conservation groups for the Boundary Waters. Through the council, Oberholzer spearheaded the Shipstead-Nolan Act of 1930, the first legal protections for the purpose of wilderness to be enacted by Congress. This act prohibited the homesteading of land for sale, construction of dams, and shoreline logging. Despite this, the 1940s and 50s saw a resurgence of logging throughout the interior of the Boundary Waters, alongside a growing recreational tourist industry, intensifying the debate over the diverging interests of local residents, loggers, and tourists. In 1964, in response to diplomacy by environmentalists to limit logging and motor use, the Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman, appointed the Selkie Committee to create a report on the state of the Boundary Waters ecosystem. The day after the committee was formed, the first of many public debates was held by the Quetico Superior Council, giving the attending Dr. Selkie insight on the divided public opinion on use of the Boundary Waters. As the wilderness situation continued to evolve in Minnesota, nationally, a major environmental movement was developing. In 1964, after 8 years of debate and over 60 drafts, the landmark Wilderness Act established the National Wilderness Preservation System, prohibiting roads, motor use, and logging. While the Boundary Waters was named a wilderness, it had major exceptions to the act, allowing logging and motor use to continue as new regulations had to come from the Secretary of Agriculture directly. Stricter regulations for the Boundary Waters wilderness were adopted by Secretary Freeman in 1965 following recommendations from the Selkie Committee. Freeman's directive sparked strong local outrage as increased restrictions were placed on logging, mining, and motorized travel, creating zones of uses. Leading into the 1970s, logging continued right alongside recreation. In 1973, the Minnesota Public Interest Research Group filed a federal lawsuit against the Forest Service over continued logging sales within the Boundary Waters without an environmental impact statement. The court ruled to suspend logging, but this was reversed in 1974, proving federal legislation through diplomacy was the only way to solve this dispute. In an attempt to find a compromise, on October 24, 1975, Minnesota Representative Jim Oberstar introduced a bill proposing to split the boundary waters into two parts, creating a smaller, pure wilderness area and a national recreation area that would continue to allow logging and motorized vehicles.
What we're trying to do is to balance the uses, recognizing the different characteristics of the land and the different history of use in those areas.
Environmentalists opposed this bill, supporting Representative Donald Fraser's bill introduced in June 1976. In the Fraser bill, the entire boundary waters would be given true wilderness status, ending logging, mining, and the use of all motorized vehicles.
There are all kinds of lakes open for motorboat use in this area, not to mention the rest of the state. If you want a canoe-based wilderness experience, you have one place to go in the United States, and that's up here.
With the two bills in direct conflict, a U.S. House Subcommittee on National Parks and Recreation ordered 2 field hearings in Minnesota in July 1977. The public debate over wilderness at the hearings provided key diplomacy between the conflicting groups, leading to a drafting of a third compromise bill co-sponsored by Minnesota Congressman Bruce Vento and Californian Phil Burton. The Burton-Vento bill looked to phase out motor use and end all logging in the boundary waters, reaching similar wilderness protections as the Fraser bill, but over a longer adjustment period.
Here we said this is such an important national resource, and it's used by people from all over the country, from all over the world, so we can't let the local interests override the national interests here. And so we were able to pass the bill in the House pretty much as a pure wilderness bill.
The Burton-Vento bill stalled out in the Senate until mediation talks were held between Ely City Attorney Ron Walls and environmental attorney Chuck Dayton. The attorneys reached what is known as the Dayton-Walls Agreement, compromising to allow motorboats on certain lakes. After this agreement, the revised bill was proposed in the Senate, and after hearings and a few minor revisions, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act was passed and signed into law on October 21, 1978. The final bill included an additional 50,000 acres, a new quota system for visitors, significantly restricted motorboat and snowmobile use, and banned all logging and mining within the wilderness. Despite the new act, tensions among locals over the Boundary Waters regulations remained high into the 1980s, with multiple lawsuits filed contesting the act, which was upheld and ruled constitutional in every case. By the 1990s, the public opinion had started to shift in favor of the wilderness as local residents and business owners have adapted to the change and grown to appreciate the value of the Boundary Waters as a wilderness. Since the 1978 Act, the tourist industry has grown, with the canoe outfitting business providing for environmentally sustainable economic growth. Lessening local tensions further was another compromise in 1998 between Representatives Jim Oberstar and Bruce Vento to reopen 2 truck portages for transporting motorboats between lakes in exchange for more limited motor access on other lakes. Today, the Boundary Waters continues to face threats of environmental degradation. Proposed copper sulfide mines, Twin Metals, and Polymet are located just outside of the Boundary Waters and upstream of the watershed. This type of mining has never been done without pollution, and the proposed locations risk contaminating the pristine waters with highly toxic acid mine drainage. Although recently the mining permits have been revoked, the Boundary Waters continues to be at risk, requiring continued diplomacy to enact permanent legislation protecting against new mining threats. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act has protected this special wilderness from destructive human use, preserving untouched natural resources for generations to come. The debate between various groups of conservationists, politicians, and local residents was key in the adoption of the 1978 Boundary Waters Act, demonstrating the importance of diplomacy to resolve disputes. Today, thousands visit this wilderness every year, maintaining the local tourist economy while conserving the natural environment. The Boundary Waters demonstrates the success of American wilderness protections to secure for the American people of present and future generations the benefits of an enduring resource of wilderness.